some people seemed invested in me because they came to me with problems all the time. But that's not necessarily the same thing as mutual connection. There's a difference between being needed and being loved. I do want depth in relationships. I do want to process hard things with people, but I also want joy, playfulness, reciprocity. I want connection that isn't built entirely around me emotionally caretaking other people. Hi, I'm Barb Nangle, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. If you're tired of feeling fragmented, emotionally overwhelmed, stuck in people-pleasing, approval-seeking, overthinking, or losing yourself in relationships, you're in the right place. This podcast is about recovery for real life. Through honest stories, practical tools, and lessons I've learned through 12-Step Recovery, boundaries work, and over 4 decades of personal growth, we explore what it actually takes to stop abandoning yourself and build a life that feels more authentic, grounded, and whole. We'll talk about things like boundaries, shame, family dysfunction, reparenting, emotional regulation, self-trust, recovery, and creating internal safety so you can stay connected to yourself even when life gets hard. I'm a boundaries coach, speaker, author, and woman in recovery, and my approach is raw, honest, practical, and sometimes a little bit, a lot, sweary. I'm also an avid beachcomber. My hands are basically always cold, so I wear fingerless gloves most of the year. And I still get weirdly excited when I spot license plates with my initials BN. I don't speak for or represent any particular 12-step fellowship, though I'm deeply grateful for the role recovery has played in my life. If you're ready for real talk, emotional healing, and practical tools to help you go from fragmented to whole, keep listening. This is episode 355, Social Boundaries, How to Stay Connected to Yourself Around Other People. This month's theme is social boundaries, and in thinking about this, I realized that for most of my life, social situations were exhausting for me because I abandoned myself constantly in order to make other people feel comfortable. Now, I didn't understand that at the time. I thought I was being nice and flexible and accommodating and easygoing. But what I was really doing was overriding myself over and over again. Eventually, that led to resentment, exhaustion, frustration, and honestly, a lot of relationships that didn't actually feel good to me. So today, I want to talk about social boundaries, not in the sense of etiquette or rules or controlling other people, but in terms of how to stay connected to yourself while being connected to others. Because I think that's really what healthy social boundaries are about. They help you participate in relationships and social situations without abandoning yourself in the process. One of the biggest things boundaries helped me understand is that uncertainty is not the same thing as kindness. A perfect example is social gatherings. If I have people over to my house now, I'll often say something like, the party is from 7 to 9:30. Now, that may sound really simple, but years ago, I never would have done that. I would have just said it starts at 7 and left it open-ended. And that's because I would have worried what people would think, or that they would think that I was rude or controlling or too rigid to say what time the party ends. So instead, I would secretly hope that people would pick up that I was tired and just leave. And because I didn't actually tell people that I wanted them to leave, I'd become resentful when they didn't. And I didn't have the capacity to say things like, hey, I'm getting tired and need to go to bed, or it's time to start winding down. I just quietly stewed and suffered. But now, by communicating clearly ahead of time, I don't have to manage all that internal resentment because everybody already knows what the expectation is. This is called proactive boundaries rather than reactive frustration. And what's interesting is that boundaries often help other people function better too. I remember early in recovery, a woman asked me to help her move, and I told her, I can be there from 2 to 4. Now, this was a woman who had really poor boundaries. And afterwards, the couple days later, she said something really interesting to me. She said it was actually extremely helpful for her to know that I was going to be there from 2 to 4 on Saturday, because then she could organize the rest of her day around my availability and save certain tasks for when I was there. Now, that moment really stood out to me because it helped me really internalize the notion that boundaries aren't selfish. Clarity helps people. Clarity is kind. It also saves time because there's not all that debating about who's going to do what, when, where. People can respond to what you offer them, and they could say, well, that doesn't work for me, but maybe 3 to 5 would, or something like that. People who struggle with boundaries often think vagueness is kindness, but clarity is usually kinder. So saying, I can help whenever you need me, or I don't care where we go, where do you want to go, isn't always kind. Another area where social boundaries became really important for me was around food, because I'm in recovery for compulsive overeating and sugar addiction. Now, in the beginning of my recovery, I felt like I had to explain myself to people. When I felt like that for decades, not just in the beginning of recovery. So if someone offered me dessert, I'd say, I don't eat sugar. And suddenly I turn into their research project. Well, do you eat fruit? What about honey? What about this? What about that? And that didn't feel good. So then I shifted to saying, I don't eat sweets. And then people would say things like, oh my God, you're so good. I could never do that. And eventually I'd end up over-explaining and disclosing deeply personal information about my recovery that people didn't really need to know, and that made me feel unnecessarily vulnerable, often to complete strangers. I thought I needed to justify my boundaries in order for them to be acceptable, and that's just not true. What I eventually learned is that I don't owe everybody access to my private inner world. So I finally landed on saying something much simpler. I have food issues. And interestingly, when I started saying that, people stopped asking questions, because nowadays people have so many different kinds of food issues. Maybe it's just preferences like they're vegan or they're paleo. Maybe it's they have allergies like to dairy or gluten. But in this case, I said enough to protect myself without making myself unnecessarily vulnerable. That was a huge lesson for me, because over-explaining is often an attempt to create safety through other people's approval or understanding. I felt like I need them to approve of me, and I especially need them to understand where I'm coming from so I can feel safe. But I didn't understand that back then. I thought I was being considerate by explaining myself. Now I know I was trying to justify myself because it made me feel safe. I went from over-explaining to defending to justifying, eventually to concise self-protection. It was a journey, and that's often what boundary building is like. It's an experimental process where you get to know yourself better and then act on that new knowledge. And sometimes boundaries mean recognizing I can protect myself without getting permission from other people. I also had to learn environmental boundaries around food. For years, I tried to be normal at potluck. I told myself I'll just have one plate. And then I tried, well, I'll only try 3 things. And then I tried, I'll only have something from the potluck dish that I bring. And none of that worked for me. I eventually realized I needed to stop trying to overpower the environment that repeatedly destabilized me. So now when I go to a potluck, I bring something I like to eat, but before I even get there, I portion my own food out ahead of time and eat only that. That's not punishment, it's self-protection. And if people feel awkward about me bringing my own food, I understand now that their discomfort is not mine to manage. It's theirs. And their discomfort does not mean danger to me. My boundaries are for me, not against them. I think that's one of the hardest things for people to understand about social boundaries. Your job is not to manage everybody else's emotional reactions to your self-care. I stopped relying on willpower and started designing situations that support my recovery. This is important because many people think boundaries are only verbal, but social boundaries can look like bringing your own food, leaving early, driving separately, limiting time exposure, setting start and end times, not attending certain events, choosing smaller gatherings, declining emotionally draining dynamics, or telling someone, I'll meet you for coffee. That way, they're not in your house, you're not in their house. And coffee dates connote this is going to be brief. Another huge area of social boundaries for me has been friendships. Before recovery, I really didn't understand my codependence at all. I did most of the work in my friendships. I made the calls, sent the text, initiated the plans, accommodated other people's schedules, and often chose what they wanted to do rather than what I wanted to do. And then I felt resentful. But instead of talking to my friends directly, I complained about them to other people behind their back. And what recovery taught me to realize is that relationships don't actually have to work that way. So rather than confronting all my friends, I started experimenting with doing less. I stopped carrying the entire relationship. And what I found was that many friendships simply faded away. And yeah, that was painful, but honestly, it was less painful than living with constant resentment about a bunch of different people. And at the same time, I started building friendships in recovery where there was actual mutuality. We'd go out for coffee after meetings, and then eventually we'd spend time together outside of meetings, and people initiated with me too. I started to experience what it felt like to be in relationships where the emotional labor wasn't entirely one-sided. And one of the things I eventually realized is that some people seemed invested in me because they came to me with problems all the time. But that's not necessarily the same thing as mutual connection. There's a difference between being needed and being loved. I do want depth in relationships. I do want to process hard things with people, but I also want joy, playfulness, reciprocity. I want connection that isn't built entirely around me emotionally caretaking other people. One of the most important friendship boundaries I've developed is this: I'm not going to do more than 50% of the work in maintaining a relationship. Now, that doesn't mean I rigidly keep score. It means I pay attention to how relationships feel. And honestly, what happened over time is I didn't usually make dramatic decisions about ending friendships. It was more that after years of reaching out to certain people and feeling ignored or dismissed or emotionally drained, it just stopped feeling good to keep trying. I didn't decide that's it, I'm done. I just listened to myself. And I think that's what social boundaries are ultimately about. Not becoming rigid or antisocial or trying to control people, but creating relationships and social experiences where you don't have to leave yourself behind in order to participate. Because when you stop abandoning yourself socially, something really beautiful happens. You stop building relationships out of exhaustion, resentment, overfunctioning, and performance. And you start building relationships where you can actually feel safe being yourself. So many of us overgivers confuse pursuit with love, accommodation with friendship, and emotional labor with connection. There's a difference between being needed and being loved. Now, as a recap, here are some of the major themes I mentioned here. 1, social boundaries reduce resentment before it starts. 2, social boundaries are often about reducing unnecessary emotional exposure. 3, social boundaries are about structuring environments that support who you want to be. And 4, friendship boundaries are about mutuality, not scorekeeping. Social boundaries aren't about becoming rigid or antisocial. They're about creating relationships and social experiences where you don't have to leave yourself behind in order to participate. If you've ever left work exhausted, resentful, or wondering why you keep saying yes when you're already overwhelmed, I want you to know something. Most people don't struggle with workplace boundaries because they don't know what to say. They struggle because of what happens after they try to set one, sometimes even before. The guilt, the pressure, the fear of disappointing people, the urge to soften it, explain more, or take it back completely. That's exactly what I'll be teaching in my upcoming live workshop, Boundaries at Work, Prevent Burnout and Protect Your Energy, happening Wednesday, June 10th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. We'll talk about why boundaries collapse under pressure, what real-time self-override actually looks like at work, and how to stay connected to yourself when discomfort shows up. You'll leave with practical workplace scripts, real-world examples, and a much deeper understanding of what actually makes boundaries hold. Learn more at higherpowercc.com/boundariesatwork.